One of the first things you notice when studying ancient Greek coins is just how much importance they gave to their civic symbols. The polis, the city-state, the concept of being a citizen of a city was immensely important to the Greeks, much more than their overall identity as ethnic Greeks or as part of a larger Hellenic world. Each of these cities had their own symbols that represented their pride in their own polis, and for me, none of these symbols is as cleaner, more elegant, and efficient in communicating its message than the shield on the coins struck at the famous city of Thebes. This is one of my favorite coin designs, even if at first glance it looks rather plain, rather simple. It's mostly because it manages to communicate so much with so little. The shield was one of the main pieces of kit for a Greek hoplite, that large round barrier that covered most of their upper body. It was the most characteristic and richly decorated part of their equipment. Imagine that imposing image of a wall of interlocked shields and those menacing spears all pointing at you, while your commander somehow expected you to charge against that. And the Thebans proudly displayed this symbol on their coins, the so-called Boeotian Shield. This name comes from the region where Thebes was located, Boeotia. In fact, the shield wasn't only featured on coins of Thebes, but in all of the region of Boeotia. And that's what we will be talking about today. Let's explore the history of Thebes and of all of Boeotia through their coins. Let's start by quickly contextualizing ourselves geographically. Where is Thebes? Where is Boeotia? Some of its foundational myths. After all, we're talking about the birthplace of the great Heracles. Let's then discuss this very curious shield with this very unique shape. And finally, let's go over a small collection of lovely Boeotian coins struck in Thebes and some of its neighboring polis. Wonderful coins in this video, and enough shields to make a hoplite wall all for ourselves. So let's get started. Now, Boeotia occupies central Greece, directly north of Attica, where Athens is located. It's quite a beautiful region with plains that are remarkably broad and vast for Greek standards. Some proper arable land in a region famous for its rugged terrain like Greece was something rare. Although, as you can see from some of the pictures, it's not like it was the flattest of all terrains. You can see some fairly tall, rocky mountains on the background, so not the easiest region on the planet to sustain a large population. But for the ancient Greeks, this was prime real estate. The Greeks were a very tough, very hardy people. The many cities in this region were often unified in a federation. They coordinated in matters of defense, joining their individual levies into a unified army. Each city also issued their own coins, but they were unified in a single monetary standard to facilitate trade. They also organized themselves into districts, which in turn sent their own magistrates to represent them in a unified federal council. Thebes was the most important and most famous of these polis, and often it assumed a leadership role in this federation. Thebes is also interesting in regards to its mythological connections, as the birthplace of Heracles. The story tells that Alcmene, a mortal woman who laid with Zeus, gave birth to Heracles in Thebes while running away from Zeus's wife, Hera. Hera sent 2 snakes in an attempt to kill Heracles and his little brother. It was at that moment that the baby Heracles showed he had inherited some of his father's powers, as he grabbed the snakes and crushed their heads. Heracles would spend his childhood and grow up in Thebes, so the city became the setting for his first steps before he set out on his legendary 12 labors. There's also a famous poem called The Shield of Heracles. It talks about this wonderful shield made by the god of craftsmanship, Hephaestus. Its surface was said to be made out of shiny gold with details in silver, ivory, and expensive colored glass. At the center boss would fit a terrifying face, that of the god of fear, Phobos, where we get our word phobia from, to represent we are very afraid of something. The shield was meant to rarely need to be used, as its presence, just its presence, was enough to scare away any enemies. And since we're talking about the shield, it's a good clue for us to talk about this key feature of Boeotian coinage. What's up with that unusually shaped shield? Let's start with this early classical coin here. This was struck at Thebes between 480 and 460 BC. It's actually a fairly sad coin contextually. I mean sad because it was struck at a time Thebes had just been liberated by the Greeks after being occupied by the Persians. The loss of standing that incurred by being conquered by foreigners and having to be rescued by your own fellow Greeks, that was a major morale blow to the Thebans. In any case, just look at how incredibly thick this shield looks. The high relief of the shield is nearly as thick as the flank of the coin itself. It's crazy. It blurs the line between a coin and a small sculpture in silver. In contrast to this very imposing obverse, the reverse is a little bit underwhelming. There isn't a lot here visually. We have an ink sponge in this shape that somewhat resembles a swastika. In reality, it's not a swastika. It's a transitional evolution between the first reverse designs that were basically just a punch meant to show the coin was made out of pure metal all the way to its core, and it's this mixing point between a design and just a punch. So it has some sort of visual element in it, but it isn't a whole lot. And at the center of this punch, we have a small letter, theta, the initial for Thebes. It's like the first signal of a proper reverse design, which will be used in coinage from that point onwards. But let me go back to the obverse and let's talk about this shield. The Boeotian shield is basically round, like the more common fully circular aspis, but with two deep side cuts that give that violin waist profile you see here. The denomination Boeotian for this shield is actually sort of like a modern label that's stuck because this outline shows up so consistently on Boeotian art. There are actually no ancient sources that talk about a specific Boeotian shield. Functionally, these scallops at its sides likely would maybe like let a spear be held closer to the shield's center line, rather than always reaching over to the sides or the rim. My first reaction is actually somewhat negative for this design. Constraining your spear to these two slots meant you couldn't quickly switch between using your spear from an underhand to an overhand position, above the shield. So your enemy always knew more or less where your strikes would come from. However, it also gave some advantages. I mean, your thrusts could come from a guarded stance that wouldn't expose much of your body. And of course, these slots could let your hand holding the spear sit at a more comfortable position, meaning it would take longer for you to get tired. This might have also made the shield a little bit lighter and easier to carry, which matters a lot when the shield is the heaviest thing on your body. Some theories also conjecture these shields were made differently. They were probably made out of hide, stretched over a wicker frame rather than the traditional construction method of having thick wood planks glued together and wrapped in a sheet of bronze. Wicker and hide are flexible, which would make the shape easier to achieve and lighter to handle. It would also explain why no shields of this shape have survived to our days, as both of these materials are perishable. The larger geographical context matters here too. Phalanx units prized uniform kit, and the Boeotian outline is narrower and more oval than the pure circle. So what we may be seeing here is probably like a regional style, adapted to the local way of waging war, that was inside this wider hoplite toolkit, rather than a complete rejection of the original aspis. It was more like a regional thing. And today's video is brought to you by L5, the new ancient coin marketplace. L5 is a platform developed by coin collectors for coin collectors. It offers the lowest transaction fees on the market, from 5% down to 0. No listing fees or undisclosed reserve prices, and you can choose between buying and selling coins through its auctions or its fixed price lists. The most important idea behind L5 is generating an environment of trust between people. You can buy, you can sell, you can do both if you want to, all within a system of transparency and accountability between its users and the platform. Apart from a lifetime guarantee of authenticity in case any coin sold on L5 turns out to be a counterfeit, the platform works with a group of renowned experts on different fields of ancient numismatics and a body of expert moderators, with the objective of creating an environment of high trust where every single coin is reviewed by more than one person and curated by an input from the community. I think their concept of collaborative accountability, low fees, and transparency is a revolution to the ancient coin market, and I can't recommend the L5 enough. Give them a look. I personally think this is a wonderful concept that the ancient coin market was in need for. Visit l5.com. But everything I said is just theory. Let's focus on numismatics here. Let's go to our second piece. Here we have another stater from Thebes from about 440 to 425 BC, so a few decades after the first one. Once more, it was struck in this scandalously high relief, so typical for these coins. But now we have a more refined image of the shield. This is what most Theban staters look like. After making the round relief of the shield, I think the engravers must have polished the surface of the die or something, because as you can see, we have this very even, very smooth surface of the shield, while the previous piece had sort of like a bumpier surface. There's also a finer level of detail on the line, that line that goes along the rim of the shield. The previous had varying distances of an offset of the line. Some areas were wider, others narrower. Here, it might have been the case that some technique was used to maintain a consistent distance, because it goes so perfectly parallel along the rim. It's a much more balanced looking obverse. Heading to the reverse, we have Heracles. Now, this is not a very common reverse type for these coins, despite I just mentioning that Heracles came from Thebes. This image here is an attempt of Thebes of probably asserting their civic pride. Athens was very close to Boeotia, and the Athenians, being a much larger city compared to Thebes, very rich, very capable of assembling larger armies, the Athenians often tried to subjugate the cities of Boeotia. And this coin was made in a series that celebrates Boeotia's revolt and independence against the Athenians. And they picked Heracles, their civic deity, to advertise their independence. I love how if we pick this coin and we compare it against a contemporary Athenian tetradrachma, both coins have many visual similarities, like the square border around the design, the letters abbreviating the name of the peoples who issued it. It's like if the Thebans were mocking the Athenian coin by making their own version with their own god. I can see the Thebans brainstorming for the idea of this coin and saying like, oh, you issue Athenian owls? Okay, we will issue Theban Heracles. Lovely coin. It's just such a wonderful display of defiance from the Thebans. Alright, continuing on, this third issue follows the last one, dating approximately between 425 and 400 BC. Once more on the obverse, we have the Boeotian Shield, but once again we see slight stylistic improvements over the previous issue. The shield is slightly narrower this time, and the line that goes around, it goes parallel to the rim of the shield, is refined even further. Now it has a little bit more space from the rim, and the line is a little bit thicker. I think it's another improvement over the previous coin, because this shield just looks more symmetrical, it looks more harmonious. This series was made during the Peloponnesian War, fought between Athens and Sparta. Having shown to the other Greek states that Thebes was strong once again and would not be pushed around and would not be pushed into submission by any of the participating states in this conflict, the city then abandons the defiant issue against Athens featuring Heracles, and it adopts their most popular type for this reverse, featuring an amphora. The amphora was a large container for liquids. This would become the most popular motif in this kind of denomination. There are just so many varieties featuring this amphora, with the vase itself made in different styles, with a series of varieties on what's written on the left and right fields. For this particular example, since this is an earlier die in the series, we have the amphora placed inside the square border and sculpted in surprisingly high relief. Later examples tend to have a flatter amphora. And the letters theta, epsilon are an abbreviation of Thebes, the name of the city. Later examples will replace this for names of magistrates and other officials responsible for the issue of coins. Okay, let's keep going. Now we're leaving Thebes and showcasing some of the other cities of Boeotia. This is yet another stater, but this time is from the city of Tanagra, dated between 400 and 350 BC. Tanagra was an ally of Thebes, and its government was actually quite friendly to the Thebans. For this reason, the city retained its autonomy and participated in the federal system. And one of their shows of allegiance to the Thebans is, as we can see, that they used the shield once again at the obverse of their coins. This one has a nice little counter mark at the very center of the shield, this round mark. The reason for this mark being here, I frankly don't know. Generally, this was done when a coin left its original territories, and then it was punched, it was validated as good money at another city. But since the Boeotians used to have the same currency system in this entire region, I would have guessed they didn't need to countermark their coins when one piece went to another city. So this might indicate this particular coin maybe left Boeotia and was countermarked somewhere else around the Mediterranean. Now, as we get to the reverse, wow, that's so creative. We have this wonderful half-body image of a horse galloping to the right, with a wreath around its body. The control mark is this little grape cluster seen below it, and the initials of the city are above, Theta Alpha for Tanagra. This issue is particularly artistic, and I find it fascinating how the coinage shows that these cities, they might have been united into some sort of federation, while also leaving some space, like a whole other side of the coin, for their own individual messages for each city that made coins. So they would have an artistic license to choosing the design at least at half of the coin. Imagine what a typical marketplace of a Boeotian city would have looked like, with coins with lots of different designs, each with its own issuing city, circulating side by side, while also showing they were unified, they were united by featuring the shield on the obverse. It would have been a fascinating numismatic experience. Okay, shall we keep going? Now we have a tiny little fractional coin. This one comes from the city of Thespie, dated to the same period as the previous coin. So as I said, this coin and the previous one could have perfectly met at some ancient marketplace. On the obverse, nothing out of the ordinary. We have once again the shield. But since this is such a small coin, just 1.6 grams in weight, the engravers, they were smart. They realized they couldn't make the shield with this very high relief. They couldn't make it pop out so much, otherwise it would suck up all of the little silver available. So here we have a flat design. I also like the fact that they exaggerated the thickness of the line around the rims to compensate for the lack of relief. And this rounds up the design a bit better. It takes the limitations of the coin, but still makes a pretty good looking shield. And going to the reverse, we have a couple of crescent moons and some letters in the empty fields around the moons. The letters read Theta, Epsilon, Sigma, Phi, Iota, so Thespii. The city uses crescents on the majority of their coinage. The reasons we don't really know, frankly. Some theorize it is due to the various religious cults present in the city. Aphrodite was a particularly important goddess for this city, and she was often represented by the moon. Or, since we just talked about shields, there's another kind of shield that was used by the Greeks, in particular lighter infantry, skirmishers, who used a shield in the shape of a crescent. So it could be also a reference to this type of soldiers that Thespia had. Different to Tanagra, Thespia was very hostile towards Thebes. They begrudgingly participated in their federations, even though they openly defied Thebes, and this eventually led to conflict, which led to the destruction of the city in 373 BC. The region was recolonized by Thebans after the original population was massacred, and this coin is amongst some of the last issues of Thespia under its original population. And finally, we get to the last coin of today. This piece takes us to a much later period in Boeotian history. So this was struck between 225 and 171 BC, so quite a jump in time, more than a century. This issue is significantly past the glory days of the Thebans. Thebes was actually destroyed in 338 BC by Philip II of Macedon and his son, the future Alexander the Great, after Thebes refused to submit to Macedon. But even before that, Thebes and the entire region of Boeotia really were in a state of decline in importance. The region remained a federation in Hellenistic times, acting as a small base for troops for the Macedonians, but apart from that, the region just became unimportant and uninvolved in any important geopolitical events. This issue is dated around the time Rome would go to war against Macedon and seize the entire Greek mainland for itself, including Boeotia. So what we have here is a drachma, around 4.5 grams of silver. And now it shows an artistic style much more in line with the Hellenistic artistic tradition of the time, because as you can see, it looks very different from the previous coins. Despite being under the sphere of influence of Macedon, the Boeotians issued their own coin types. In this one we have on the obverse the portrait of Poseidon, the god of the seas, looking kinda grumpy in fact, and he wears a laurel crown. On the reverse we have the goddess of victory, Nike, holding a wreath and a trident. Quite an interesting piece of trivia for this coin. Maybe that's another theory of mine, but by looking at this design, I think it emulates almost perfectly the reverse design of the very important gold staters issued by Alexander the Great, which also feature a Nike in this exact same position. However, this coin doesn't make reference to the Macedonian king. Instead, it references the Boeotian people who made it. It reads Boeotion on the right side of Nike. This is one of the last precious metal issues of Thebes. A few decades later, the entire region of Boeotia would be taken over by the Romans, and Thebes would lose its rights to issue coins. A sad ending for Thebes, not with a bang, but with a whimper. But hey, the city still exists today, so we can say it was successful. You can actually visit Thebes, although not much of the ancient Thebes is left. Fortunately, it left us a very significant numismatic legacy, and its silver coins with the shield, despite being a bit expensive due to its demand by collectors, they're not at all rare. So if you're fond of coins of mainland Greece and you can save up a little bit, you should keep an eye for one. It's perfectly doable to have one of these coins in your collection. Alright, now let me know, which type of coin did you enjoy the most? Let us know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.